Thank you so much for joining today. We're very excited to have Cory and Richard here to talk about what they've been doing with the farming community and financial risk and modeling and the steps they're taking to really improve those industries and help farmers. I will let them kind of speak to their background a little bit more. But again, I just wanted to note that if you have questions, please drop it in the Q&A section. And if you want to speak, you can raise your hand and I'll give you access. With that, I'll let Cory and Richard dive in. So we're very excited to have them.
All right. Thank you, Mitsu. I'm going to start first today. And my name's Cory Walters, and I'm a faculty member at the University of Nebraska in the Department of Agricultural Economics. And I am also involved in the family farm back here in the northwest corner of Montana, which I'll discuss here in a little bit. And one of my interests in this endeavor has been how has the farm survived over time and evolved. And with that, I met Richard along the path at an extension meeting in Kentucky when I used to work there. And with that, we produced this. So let's jump into this. I'm going to start first for a little bit, and then Richard will take over, and then I'll come back in towards the end. So our overview of our presentation today is we're going to motivate going from averages to distributions. Talk about problems that producers face, why Analytica is a great tool to do this, jump into some of the characteristics that farmers face in Analytica, and then, of course, present some results. So let's get into it. We want to use models to visualize risk because they can say a lot show a lot of information about risk, and we want to go from averages to distributions. And a great analogy to do this is to think of going to a state like Nebraska, and let's say you get a sample of people that live there, and you want to sample their wealth or something. Occasionally, you take the average of that sample. Somewhere along the line, you're going to get Warren in your sample, and that single observation is going to make that wealth, that average wealth of that sample, huge. And that's misleading. And the point is we have to go then down to that distribution. What's going on in that distribution? And that's very important for farmers because at the beginning of the year, we're thinking about distributions with unknown prices and yields and a few other things in there. So it's important to think slow and think about different outcomes that affect us financially. We've known about this presentation for a while, and last week I was in the Arches National Monument or National Park, and with the family, and we were walking down this nice, well-defined path. There's our daughter there ahead of us having a good time, clearly not aware of the dangers surrounding us. And off to the side was a rainstorm coming, and I was worried about maybe some lightning in that thing. Maybe we would get stuck out there, and then it made me think of my cousin who was on a nice morning hike a couple of years ago up here in Glacier National Park, not far from here, and there was a sow grizzly about 30 feet away from them, walking parallel with them, and that bear didn't give a hoot about them because the bears in the park are quite used to people. And so they oftentimes don't go over and eat people. But nevertheless, dangers are to the sides, and that's the importance of the distributions. I want to show an example, and I've never shown this before, but it matters in how we get to where we're at, and then how we think about the future. So a little bit about the family farm here is we left Harlan, Iowa, in around 1900, made it to Chinook, Montana for a little bit. The banks closed, irrigation payments were due, land was paid for, the family walked away. And they walked away before they were fully ruined. There was still a little bit of money around, but not a lot. And they left some equipment even by the side of the road that I believe the government scrapped. And then made it over here to Kalispell. Dad started working for some off-farm income. We walked away from the family farm in 1989 and went to zero land base and survived a few droughts. I was able to, my wife and I actually were able to buy the original farm back. We moved the house around, done a few strange things, and we're still here today. And then, of course, you had the 2015 drought for us. Lost a pile of money, and it was also the first year I had a kidney stone. So that's always fun. So we're here today, and that's what matters. So if you visually, the same thing is here. The idea here is that systems evolve by subtraction, and what farms do is, in the farming communities, you evolve by subtracting out the people that can't make it. And those are the ones that essentially hit the whatever we want to call them, an uncle point, a point at which the banker is no longer their friends. So we want to survive these things over time. And over here to the right, that's kind of where we're at today. And we, as the farm here, need to survive this. So here's where we're at today. We owe very little in equipment. We owe a fair amount for our small farm. Again, we're quite small. On land. We have a little bit of working capital, and we have some equipment, and the land's worth something, although I'd be skeptical of that given how this stuff is moving around. Let me move this just a little bit. There we go. Let's get to the important stuff. So we've invested just in fertilizer, seed, and herbicides about $275,000 this year, and we expect to make about $190,000. Now, if this storm that's brewing up over here right now comes in here and annihilates us with large hail, we could be in a completely different position here very, very quickly, and that's what scares us. So we have access to about $300,000 in an operating note that we can use to plant the crop. So that means then right now we have about $155,000 borrowed, which again, this is a small farm, so this actually isn't too much. So this kind of looks like a winning combination. I expect to make a pile of money here for this small farm, but again, nothing is in the grain bin. So here's the problem. We've made the investment in the spring. We don't know what yields and prices will be. Right now, it looks like we could have record yields, and prices have been fairly high. However, if yield goes to zero, then that kind of impacts the revenue function. So at the same time, our farm financial position is also unique to us, and this is why we want to get down to individual models so that producers can identify their exposure and how they work. And this is very important by location, crop practice. Richard here with me. He raises a completely different set of crops in Kentucky. He's got $1 million operating note. So things are greatly different just between us. So there's some tools that help, but they also add to the complexity, and that's what we want to dive into here. So we want to talk about crop insurance, which is essentially just like an option. You pay a premium, and then if something happens, they'll pay you back, and that's a federal program. We have our capital reserves. That would be our working capital. Then we also have forward contract abilities where we can sell today for fall delivery. Now, there's a few folks around here that are likely not doing very much of that this year, because last year they sold a whole bunch in the spring for fall delivery. We had a fairly poor yield and prices went up. So you're then buying back at a higher price than what you sold for, because you couldn't deliver all those bushels. That is a pinch point you want to stay away from, because then you're going to working capital to get that. Well, you don't have any more working capital because you left all that in the ground because it didn't produce anything, because you invested it, and now you're going to the bank to get a loan. And of course, you have this farm bill thing going on off to the side, which has its own goofy characteristics. So I know really nothing about growing a crop. I can't even tell you how plants evolve over time. I can tell you canola is completely different than wheat. I rely on an agronomist for that. But what I am good at is trying to manage all of these things together. Okay. And improving our management of these concepts improves the farm performance and then can also improve the food supply. Let's get to a couple definitions here before we jump into the model. Risk is simply the possibility of suffering harm or loss. Uncertainty is a condition of being in doubt. We're interested in risk, getting way over there in that end of that distribution that causes us harm or loss. Okay, and risk is personal because we all have different tolerances for that. So we're going to be very strict in this, and we're going to define risk as a financially devastating, low probability event. And at the same time, we're also going to say that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And what that means is I cannot rely on, or any individual farmer cannot rely on using past experiences solely as showing our risk exposure. There's other things that can happen that we have just not seen yet, and we need to be cognizant of that. Okay. So when we write all this out, when we want to get to our net income here, we can create this thing, and we can have prices and basis and yields and costs and hedging and insurance and all this stuff. And we can make it can get pretty complex pretty fast and very, very difficult to maneuver through conceptually. However, there is some good news, and this is where Richard, you're going to jump in here, and yes, I will move the slides forward for you.
I'm going to jump in if Mitsu will let me here, and yes, I'm going to jump in. Cory, when I show this equation up on the board, that's when the farmers in the audience start pulling out their cell phones. They start looking at the markets. They start looking at the weathers. So I'm gonna approach this at a different point of view. If we look at it down there, we've been trying to be able to reach farmers with a description of risk, and we want to give them a visual representation and something that they're used to so they can understand. We need to talk in their terms. They experience risk. They have a lot more knowledge of it than you or I. An older farmer really knows about risk. He knows what's happened. And so we're trying to figure out a way, how do you present that? And what we found out is that Analytica is a great way to present, a visual way to present risk. And as we look at the first example, I've been modeling risk for a long time. I used to model risk at Los Alamos Labs in Livermore, just down the road from you in California there, Mitsu. I used to model risk. It was a different kind of risk. It was risk of whether or not fusion would take off, or risk of whether or not an electric utility would blow up. It's a different kind of risk, but I'm used to modeling risk. And so you set up goals, and then you have to be able to explain uncertainty. You have to have a metrics to measure your goals. And we're going to talk about time, how you define time, and then how you handle choices. The whole idea for this is to give the farmer a way to choose between those different choices. Which crop insurance level does he want? Which hedging level does he want? And there are all kinds of choices, so we have to pick between those. And Analytica, it turns out that Analytica is a perfect example of this. It's easy to learn. It leaves time to frame the problem. It leaves time to think about the problem. The main thing is putting the problem in context, because we're dealing in uncertainty. So there's no single answer. So you have to think about the problem. Analytica treats distributions as variables, so it expresses uncertainty naturally. So it just comes up, it's a much easier way to deal with it. It provides metrics that you need, such as averages, a standard deviation. You can write your own formulas to do other metrics, such as expected shortfall, and which is that's a measure of actually falling short. This is a stress test. What Cory and I are going to talk about is how you apply a stress test to make sure that the farmer can survive the year that he's in. If you survive the stress test over and over again, you arrive at your goal. So we use value at risk, which just says that once you get into distributions, you can start to look at these two things. And I'll get into this more later. I just want to say that Analytica has a clever use of recurrence, and we express time dependence in this model, and it's very important. It's easy to use Analytica. The main reason that I was drawn to Analytica is the influence diagrams and the smart arrays, which make it very simple. So let's just think about it. Remember that crappy equation Cory had up there, okay? And you come in, now think of this. This is the same equation. This is exactly the same equation, but it's in pictures. You can see that this is showing the influences. You can see that crop insurance affects income. Crop insurance also affects total cost. Yield and price are connected. They're correlated. They're under one roof here, but your yield can actually affect your costs. So all of these things play together in this picture to produce the outcome, the income that we want to look at. And once we get a distribution of income, we can look at that distribution to stress test that distribution. So that's sort of the plan that we have going forward. Now, for some of you that think, man, this is really easy. These guys get paid for doing, well, I don't get paid, but Cory gets paid. But anyway, he gets paid for doing this really simple stuff. Let's just look under the hood a little bit. Let's just look under that one node or module that said yield price. And you look under that and you can see there are layers that are underneath this. And you also see what's very important there is our distribution density library and our multivariate distributions, because that's what Analytica provides you. So Analytica provides you these things for you to use. Then you can put them together in your own manner to build your model. So you have that available. We've used gamma distributions. We've used normal distributions, of course, log normal. We've used things like linear interpolation. We've used spline interpolation. All those things are easy for you. They're all done for you by Analytica. So you can use those quite easily by tapping into this platform. We go to the next thing here. We just want to show a little bit about we're thinking about this and how we're dealing with this. So if you think about, you're starting in March 1, and in March 1, this is what you know. It's kind of like Cory said, you know the crop insurance spring guarantee has been determined, so you can decide which crop insurance level you have. That's a known fact on March 1. Also on March 1, the expected futures price is known, but it's just an expected price. However, if you forward contract or participate in the futures market, you make that price real. So you're reducing that uncertainty. So now just think about this, okay? So a lot of people in the past have told farmers that, wow, you guys need to reduce your risk by hedging because you are reducing your uncertainty, thereby reducing your risk. Well, we want to look at this more closely and also see exactly how that plays out. If you look at this is time. As we go through time here, we're looking at one season. We're going to follow price as it follows one of those random paths like Cory was talking about. Cory's path was over many years. This is a path from March 1 to November 1. And we're going to follow that path by looking at individual marketing days. Each marketing day, we can make a decision whether or not to hedge, given the crop insurance that we have, given our own expectations of yield. We can make that decision given that information each day. And just one more quick thing that's really important about crop insurance. The fall guarantee revenue crop insurance is a federal program. crop insurance wasn't used very much until Art Barnaby and some others came up with this idea that we need a revenue protection. We need to go from yield protection to revenue protection. That really changed. That was a complete change in crop insurance. We went from a small amount of producers using it to, I think, over 90% of the acres in corn and soybeans. And I'm not sure about all the crops, but in those undergo crop insurance now. So we went from things just by putting the fall guarantee in there. And what the fall guarantee is, an Asian option. For those of you, I don't know if those of you that are in the financial world, an Asian option just is what you're betting on there is the average for 1 month, what the closing prices will be on average for 1 month. And that's what the fall guarantee is. So what we're thinking about doing here, just think about this vision. We are going to start on March 1. We're going to go through time. We're going to decide based on a marketing plan whether or not we're going to sell on different days. And then when we get to November 1, we're going to evaluate how our performance was. Did we do the right thing by selling? Did we do the wrong thing by selling? When we stress test that income, we'll see if we're going to go, when we go to the banker, and I think I have my banker on this, my loan officer, I believe, is on this. So when I come to see him, if I've done a fairly good job of all these things, then he's going to loan me money next year. And if he loans me money next year, then I have survived. So I can go on. And Cory, there's an old story. Farmers live poor and die rich. And the reason that story comes about, that we can barely survive. I drive a 2000 Toyota that I had to weld to keep it together, yet I've got a net worth of $7-8 million just because I've got land. Of course, each year I have to survive in order to reach my end goal, which is to arrive at, to have the farm that I always dreamed of. So if we go to the next picture here. Okay, well, we have to define this now. This is a model. We have to look at what do we need to put in this. One thing we need, we're going to have to look at the randomness of yield. If you look at the blue line, that's a trend line for corn in Colfax County, Nebraska. I wish mine was that high. It's not, but I wish it was. But that's a trend line. As you can see, farmers have been doing a great job improving yield. As they've been improving yield, they've been making our country, that improves our national security, because food is very important in the world. And for America to be the leader in food production is very important. So farmers have done a good job. You can see that in the blue line, but you see these variations, the orange dots around the blue line, those are the variation in yield. And then every once in a while you get a terrible year. Like in 2012, you have, it's not a black swan, because we saw it in, we saw similar things. Well, down here in the 80s, for example, in 1980, you saw it. It was terrible in the 30s and et cetera, the 50s, the 30s. So we've seen it before. So it's not, can't be classified a black swan, but people tend to forget about it. So Cory and I decided to call it a dirty duck. It's a not quite black swan. But if you're the farmer and you're the one that has to pay that banker back, then that's as bad a black swan as you can ever have, because risk is personal. If we go to the next slide. So yield is going to be important. And this just is a quick diagram that shows you that in most years, yield is in the middle. Let's go back to that. Okay, unless you want to move on faster. No, sorry. Okay. Okay, so yield, this just says that the rare financially devastating events are out here in the tail. So we have to concentrate on how these distributions look and how they look out in the tail. Very tough thing to model. Okay, go on to the next slide, Cory. Okay, the next slide it just shows that Cory said that it's different for different people. It's different for different farmers, and it's even different for different management types. If you look at this, this is Colfax County, the same county. The orange is for irrigated corn. And what we have here is the cumulative income distribution. And the blue is the cumulative income distribution. This is over the last, I think it's over the last 40 years that I looked this data up and did this. Looking at this, you can see immediately that the blue, the dryland farmer, has a fat tail. He has a lot of risk because he has to survive these extreme deviations from yield. Irrigation helps make the irrigated farm more resilient. When I brought this to some of my Nebraska friends, I showed them and they said, oh yeah, everybody knows that. They know that you can make more money on dry land because you don't have to pay for all that pumping and all that equipment, but they also know you can lose your shirt. So this is just an example. That fat tail is a way you can lose your shirt. So we go on to so we've talked about yield distributions. The other thing we're going to need to fit into Cory's equation that we talked about is prices. So let's just look at prices. And Cory, if you'll move your marker over there at the beginning at March 1, right over here, let's just look. These are historical prices. This is the way they look. And if you don't think we have a lot of Rolaids in the house, you're wrong, because this is the way, this is the kind of variation you see. You start in March 1. Let's just follow this blue line here. Okay. And in this blue line, we come in here. And let's say we sold some right here because on average, it's a good thing to sell. And we're going to show that it's a good thing to sell in the spring on average. But then look what happened. My goodness, it went way up later. So you looked like a fool when you went to the coffee shop. All your neighbors that didn't sell back here were making much more money than you, which is still, that's just embarrassment. But it's worse than embarrassment if you have sold that crop and you don't raise it. If you don't raise it, then you've got to explain it to your wife and your banker. And that is a much more difficult thing, because that means you have to buy back your crop that you didn't raise, that you sold because you were so sure that the average is the way to do this, that we can use a seasonal. This is called using a seasonal. And you have to then go out and go into your reserves, dig into your reserves to pay that back. I've experienced some of those rides. Okay, I mean, it's happened to me before, and some of those rides are painful. Some of the times you've got to actually sell some of your equipment up here in order to come up with enough money to be able to finance, to convince the banker that you're not crazy. Basically what it is, you have to come up with enough money so that you can show that you're a viable option to grow the next year. Well, let's look at the red line, Cory. Again, out here on March 1, we don't know what it is. We can sell it ahead. But in March 1, this time, the thing went up right in here in the early part of the season. It went up really high. People didn't know what the crop was going to be. And you sold it. And as it came along, my goodness, it just drifted on down. Now you're a genius. Now everybody talks about, how did he do this? He's a genius. No, he's not a genius. I used the same process that got me on the blue line as I did on the red line. So you're not the genius. So it's going to be important when we think about price to trust the process and not the results, because the results are going to change from year to year. If we look at this, and looking at the data is really important. If we look at this is real data. This isn't some made up crazy stuff. This is real data. And if we look at the data, you can easily convince yourself that prices move in a random fashion. So we come to the next slide. We want to develop a model that describes prices as a random variable in time. And we're trying to do this in the simplest level, because we want to take, this is the first step so that we can look at prices, we can look at yields, and we can look at how all of these real things like farm programs, we can look how they actually benefit a farmer in a year. So we can look at that. But so we go back to the simplest, a generalized Browning stochastic model. And this is just this part right here. If you can see, this is the deterministic part that then depends on time. This is just a regular differential equation. That's what I used to get paid to solve, was regular differential equations back when I worked in Livermore. They were kind of complicated, but they were, we'd do 45 coupled equations. But if you had a big enough computer, you could solve those. Now, this other term here is the stochastic part, and it has the implied volatility. And we're doing the simplest model. We're saying, well, what if these changes are happening in on a normal distribution, a standard normal distribution? And when you look at this model, it goes as time to the square root, the stochastic part. Now let's go over here and look at mu again. Okay, again, sigma is the implied volatility, and sigma is the drift. Now, if you were doing a stock value evaluation, this might be related to your rate of return or whatever. This is a classic thing in finance. In the futures, if you look at the efficient market hypothesis that says nobody can possibly know the future, so the expectation of a futures market or futures price has to be the same, cannot change in time. The expectation cannot change in time. Okay, so we already see that the futures itself, but the expectation is the average. It's not the futures itself. The average moves at this way. And if Cory, can you go back to the last slide a minute, or go back a couple? Okay, this way. Think about this for now for a moment. Think about this. As we go through time, we see this growing, this standard deviation of this distribution growing in time. And that makes sense. The further out in time you are, the less certain you're going to be about the actual price on the actual path. Okay, now let's go back, Cory. This was really cool, and it's got us started on this project. Carrie Zimmerman was a graduate student with Cory and Kate Brooks at the University of Nebraska. And she took the data and started looking at the data. And that's really what you should do. You should let the data tell you how you're going to devise a model and how you're going to use the model. You shouldn't have the model and then say that this is the real world. It's only the real world if it fits the data. And what we see is something really interesting here. Now we're plotting marketing days here. Okay, you can see that going from 0 to 250. Well, we actually only go to 190. That's December 1. Okay. What Cory and I decided to do, if we're going to make predictions, we're going to try to keep the time frame as short as possible. It's just like a weatherman saying he's going to tell you what it's going to do the next day and not the next month. So Cory and I, we hedge our bets a little bit. We try to keep our predictions based on one season. And we do that because we have a better understanding of how this might work in one season. And also that's where the uncertainty for the farmer is the greatest, because in the summer is when he doesn't know what his prices or yields are going to be. So it's good. We do it because that's when they need the information. And we do it because we feel like we can get away with using simple equations. Okay, going to the next slide. This is just a model that we came up with. We looked at this. We looked at this data and determined that yes, it really does drift, the average. Now we're looking at the average of that distribution, not an individual year, but the average really did drift in those 30 years that Kara did those calculations or just recorded that data. So what we do is we say, well, we're going to pick a model and we're going to let that model drift. It's going to not drift much in the spring. Okay. Then we're going to allow it to drift down in the fall and sort of drift, kind of wander up just a bit as we go toward December. We call this the piecewise drift model. That's the simplest model that you can do that goes beyond drift equals zero. Now we use the Black-Scholes-Merton model, which values European options, uses drift equals zero. So this is the next step. Okay, this is and you want to do this. You want to always do it in baby steps, and this is the next step. We're putting drift into the equation. Now let's see what we get. Let's bring it on to the next thing. Let's just look at some of our. Okay, well, first of all, this is from our model. This isn't history. This is from these are just things that got spit out. We just picked out some. We do 30,000 of these at a time, but to get the average that we're showing there. But I just picked out a few to show you that, well, they look random. They look like a drunken sailor moving through time doing a random walk. But if you can look at the average of our 30,000 distributions as we go through our marketing time, it does indeed follow what we said it did. Now, coming to the next slide, you can see that this small change, just putting this drift in here, does not change the price much different from a standard Black-Scholes-Merton price distribution. It still looks almost like a log normal distribution. However, this small change provides a big opportunity for the farmer to make money hedging. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. The next slide, and before we get into the before we get into some of the results that we're going to show you, is you have to understand that price and yield are correlated or connected. When you're in Nebraska, if you have a low yield down here, let's say near this zero here at the bottom, this is yield at the bottom, and this is the price change on the side. So we're trying to look at how yield affects the price change. And if you look at the low yields, it tends to be higher. And what that's telling you, if there's a low yield, then if Nebraska has trouble raising a crop, or if you do in Colfax County, probably Nebraska has trouble. If Nebraska has trouble, the country has trouble. And so the price will end up being higher than you expected in the spring. The opposite happens down here. If you're really happy in Nebraska and you have this great crop and it is just fantastic, then most likely your neighbors had a good crop, and most likely the price will go down from the price that you expected in March 1. So this is just showing that there is a natural hedge in Nebraska. The rank correlation for Colfax County dryland production is a minus 0.6. So that's a pretty strong correlation. Okay, now let's get down to what I love about Analytica. Well, I've been using Analytica since Analytica 1, the very first version. Started out, I went to a Macworld conference with my nephew in Boston. It was either the first or second one. And I caught the bug because they were saying that the Macintosh is the computer for the rest of us. Well, I began to look at that and decided, we should be able to use computers and we should be able to use models with sophisticated thinking behind them for the rest of us. In this case, we shouldn't have just the big banks in New York have all of this type of ability. We have the computers now. And we also have, with Analytica, we have the way that we can bring this down to the farm level. So we can actually bring this to the rest of us. We can bring this to family farms. So let me just look at this really quickly and show you. We had a regular model, which you see these light colored ones here in the middle. That was our regular model. We decided we needed time dependence, so we just dropped these in. One of the great things about Analytica is it's much like an object-oriented program, so you can add these other objects as you go. You don't have to restart. So we've added these objects, so now we can follow price through time. We can make up any marketing plan we want and price at any time. When we get to our November thing, our November end of our price path, we look at that path and we then it's a key to everything that happened along that path. So then we can reshuffle it with the yield we draw from our random yields. So we can correlate these things. So that's sort of an important issue. And then we come back to this thing we were looking at, income. Now I broke out the stress test so you'd have there to the side. And we're going to discuss Ed Usitz, who is a very good extension economist that helps farmers with marketing. And he talks about the importance of having a marketing plan. And this just talks about how you take Ed Usitz's marketing plan and put it into Analytica. Now, I know we're probably running low on time, so we'll just move right along, Cory. Okay, now, go ahead, Cory. What were you going to say?
No.
Let's go back to that other one. I'm not over yet. Okay, first of all, what it's saying that on average, that Terry Timer marketing plan will make a farmer 34 cents. But in a given year, you may lose money or make money. And that's what we're showing. Okay, come on to the next one. This is just showing what we said in the beginning. It's what Sam Savage has said. You have to look at distributions. You look at distributions because risk is in the tail here, and hedging might be, the further you are this way, the better you are. And so hedging, the orange line here, is better through most of this spot. But when you get down in the tail, as you can see, as I've blown it up here, you actually are increasing your risk, because now you have to go, if you're wrong, if you've hedged wrong, you have to go buy back those bushels. So we look at the importance of looking at risk in a distribution fashion. Let's just go quickly. I just want to show, again, this is just showing this year. Let's just go to the next one. It's showing what crop insurance does. This is a better picture that shows it. This is for my Kentucky farm result. And you can see that crop insurance chops off the low energy or the low income tail. Doesn't do much at all for the average. It may give you a couple of dollars on your average. It doesn't do much at all for the average, but it works on the low energy tail. And if you look at the green line, that's crop insurance without the fall guarantee. So you can see it's not nearly as effective as crop insurance with the fall guarantee, which is this blue thing. So you can see that it cuts off this guy's the expectation that this guy's going to have to go into his capital reserves and make that money is very different here than it is if he didn't have crop insurance. Now, if he has crop insurance, it it also shows this area here is where we do the value at risk evaluation and stress tests. I'm not going to get into that, but this is just telling you how we do that. So I'm going to let Cory. I know we've gone through this really fast, and I apologize, but I'm going to let Cory talk about finding that optimum hedge. How much should you hedge? And I'm going to let Cory talk about that a little bit. Okay, Cory.
You bet. Thank you, Richard. To get to the optimal hedge, we need to make sure we're sticking with the goals of the farm. And what we have here is does the farm want to stay away from rare financially devastating events, or do they just want to minimize the uncertainty? And up here is the uncertainty, which you could find a minimum of that. But over here if we use the rare devastating events, we would find that we'd hedge less on here. So less hedging than in the world of minimizing uncertainty, because we're thinking about that tail. Second to last slide. If you're a farmer at the beginning of the year, let's say March 1, you want to have the highest expected net income as possible, and you want to keep this risk as low as possible to keep the banker from becoming your enemy. So you'd like to be up here, and so any of these sort of paths, and what these are is this is 0 hedging, like 10% hedging, 20, I don't remember the numbers, but you get the idea. More hedging costs you money, so it lowers your income, it drops it down. And then hedging also reduces your risk. And this is it with insurance, the exact same thing. And what you get is you start getting into a trade-off here. So you could see that when you buy insurance, you automatically increase your expected income. That's because the premiums are subsidized. The government pays for some of that premium. And then it greatly reduces your risk, and then hedging does the same as well. And then, of course, there's some point it kicks back around. But you can see this is where you'd want to be, is somewhere along here over time. Before we get to the results, just to throw this out, we are presenting these sort of ideas at this year's Agricultural and Applied Economics Association annual meeting in Anaheim. And you can find it online, and here's some more information about it. So a couple of concluding slides. Why are we focusing on the revenue distribution? Because we want to understand more about what's in the tail out there, because we have there's so few times we get to observe it, but it says so much about our financial path and our ability to survival. We have to be careful with that. And it also allows us to take advantage of changing technologies in equipment, cover crops, all kinds of stuff, because if when you cut off the tail of the distribution, I then or any farmer can turn around and say, well, how else can I make this place better? What can I do to improve the production capabilities of the farm? And that leads into being more resilient and being able to produce more food. This thing allows us to accurately account for risk through distributions. We're trying to get out there. What we're after, though, also is it's a bit cumbersome. We need to be able to make this thing flexible to many crops, practices, locations, counties, wherever that is, even ability for farmers to put into it. So it's kind of tough for others to use. We can build the models, it takes time, but we need more. And then the model can easily be modified to provide guidance on other issues, such as farm bill issues and other things like that. So with that, I know we went a couple minutes over, but we'd be happy to answer questions. And also, I think can we share our emails and stuff, Mitsu, if people have questions or like to reach out to us?
Absolutely. So I will send out a recording of this to all of the participants, whether they were able to join or not, and I can include your emails if people want to reach out to you guys directly. Yeah.
Awesome.
And also, I hope to keep tabs on what Richard and Cory have been working on and share that through our channels as well to keep people updated. And if you want more information on the topics as well. So great. Does anyone have any questions? I see one coming in right now.
Yeah, question there, Richard?
Yes, I see that question. Yes. No, that's a very good question. that's the kind of thing, I guess Yogi Berra says it best when he says prediction is difficult, especially about the future. So what Cory and I are trying to do is model the future. And so we're trying to look at these different things that can come up. One thing, I had a diagram showing how prices were very, how they can change so much from a shock like the Ukrainian war, from a shock like the embargo that was put on by Jimmy Carter. And so we never know about the future. It's why we need to build resilience in our farm finances. It's why we need to build all of those kinds of resilience as we look at this. And the problem, Lonnie, is that yes, we want to do this very much. That we can't really think about the Ukrainian war being likely, but that's the next step. The next step is to use, and it's what Cory and I have been thinking about, is to use, I call Bayesian statistics, where we look at maybe modifying what's going on as we progress through the year. On March 1, the chance of a Ukrainian war is what's in the market. That's what you see in the implied volatility. That's why the implied volatility is so crazy now, because the world is so uncertain. So it's already in there in our model. There is, if we had a world that was smooth and operating smoothly, and food production was going smoothly, then that volatility, the market would not be betting on this. So those guys that are out there betting on the market are telling us a little bit that they're afraid of the future when they have this high implied volatility. I hope that answers it. Is that good enough? Well, okay, we got another one. Let's see, Cory, you want to?
Sure. I'm going to let Max jump in here and give him the ability to speak. Max Henrian is our CEO here at Lumina, and he has a couple questions. So I'm just going to let him chime in really quick.
Yeah. Hi, Cory and Richard. It was super interesting to hear this. I'm curious, well, to what extent has this analysis and these models, have you used them in your making decisions about your own farms?
Max, I can say one thing. One of the first ones that I did in the early on, I made a decision, and it was very, just by looking at uncertainty and looking at how this unfolds, I was able to make a decision that I need to participate in a particular farm program. To do that, I had to give up 5% of my acreage. I had to sow that down in grass in order to be eligible for this farm program, which was nothing more than the opportunity to have a loan, to get a loan from the government. Well, I presented this to a bunch of farmers, and the expert there, the extension expert, said, well, this is just crazy. Nobody in their right mind would do this, because everybody knows corn is $3. The next year, corn was $1.25. Several of those people in that room that listened to that presentation were still farming. Some have retired recently. Several of people who didn't listen were out of farming by the next 3 years. So it's just that, yes, I use this. I certainly use this, and I use it to decide how much I should hedge. And I also use it, but mainly I use it as a way to realize that I don't blame myself if the market goes against my position. I have this data to say, okay, this is the process. We've thought about this process. I was wrong today, but I'm going to stay with the process. So that's the other thing. It sort of shelters you from all of the psychological risk that you get as the market moves up and down. I don't know if you
Right.
got
Absolutely. So what you're saying is it helps you distinguish between good decisions and good outcomes, as decision analysts like to say.
Yes, exactly.
So you can make
well
a good
said.
decision that
Exactly.
will be good in the long run, even though sometimes it's not going to work out in a particular year, but on the average it will. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we're saying that you can stay with that, but we're also saying that you can only you have to focus on surviving the short term to get to the long term. So there's two factors. That's why we have the two things: the stress test and the expected income.
Excellent. Let's see. I have a follow-on question. So, have you thought about how you could make this kind of analysis and these kinds of models available to other farmers in a form that you think they'd be able to use effectively and would enjoy using?
We would go ahead, Cory. I'll let you answer that one.
I would love to be able to do that. There's a pile of data in NAS, National Agricultural Statistics Service, at the county level, kind of like our Colfax County, Nebraska example, irrigated, non-irrigated, and all that's sitting over there. We just need to get it into Analytica in an efficient and effective way. That's where we're held up right now in the system.
Okay, great. Well, let us know. I don't think we can help you with that part of it, but if there's some ways we can help you in kind of making models and decision support tool kind of more accessible for a larger audience, happy to brainstorm with you about how we could do that.
Yeah, is there, Max? Is there any interface to get data into Analytica that?
Sure. So I mean, you can, if it's in a database, you can read that in. If it's in a JSON file or, a data file,
I'm talking like thousands of combinations of stuff that it would pick and choose. There'd be drop-down menus for where you're at.
I would think we could do that. We could help you with that. But I think the more, that's not trivial, but I'm sure we can help you figure that out. What I think is often the more challenging, especially as, it seems like you two guys are pretty unique among farmers. Most of, as you've said, when you start talking about this, a lot of them start looking at their cell phones. The question is there a way to, create a decision tool, presumably on the web or something, but in a way that they're actually going to be able to understand and find useful and interesting and ultimately help them make better decisions. And that's something which, personally, I'd be glad to talk with you about that and kind of brainstorm with you how that could work. And the good thing is here that you two guys are kind of, both modelers, but also, end users. You care about making these decisions. All too often I see models built by people like me who kind of know all the theory, but, are not going to practically use it. So I think you're already ahead of the game there in the way that you can probably get inside the mind of your prospective users.
Awesome. I'd love to visit with you about it, Richard, and I would.